Hello, welcome to Chapter 5, our first system that we are going to go through. And the first system is the integumentary system. This integumentary system makes up your skin, your hair, oil glands, sweat glands, your nails, and any sensory receptors, things that let you feel, let you know the temperature outside or around you. All of this is within your skin. People who work in the medical field that's working with the skin is dermatology. Your skin, as we mentioned in chapter 4, is that cutaneous membrane. It covers your entire body, and it is considered the largest organ in your body because it is tissues. They are living, they are growing, dividing, multiplying. It is an organ. That adult skin covers about 22 square feet, and it weighs 10 to 11 pounds. It is made of a few different layers. We have the epidermis, which is the outermost layer. This is the layer we can see. It is avascular. We remember back from chapter 4, epithelial cells do not have a blood supply. They get their blood supply from the tissues underneath through diffusion. The layer underneath the epidermis is the dermis. This is all connective tissue. And again, it's going to be vascular. This is where the dermis gets its nutrients, and the epidermis also gets its nutrients. Underneath the dermis is our third layer, the subcutaneous tissue, or hypodermis. And that areolar, that packing material, and adipose tissue, those fat cells. They're helping to kind of cushion everything. They're helping to anchor the skin down. We have storage sites for fat within there. There's a lot of blood vessels in there. We're going to talk about how some of those work. There's lamellar corpuscles. These are nerves. This is your nervous system, and they're allowing you to feel. So if we look at a picture of our skin here, this top layer up here, this is that epidermis. These are those epithelial cells that run along this layer here. Underneath, we have the dermis. The dermis is made up of this papillary dermis and reticular dermis. We'll go into more details about what that is. But as you can see, there's a lot going on in this dermis. We have some muscles here. We've got some hair follicles. We've got oil or sebaceous glands. We have sweat glands. We have lots of blood vessels. We even have nerve receptors, 3 nerve endings, nerves that wrap around these hair follicles. We even have one of those lamellar corpuscles down here at the bottom. So there's a lot going on in this dermis. The bottom layer is that subcutaneous tissue. All of this yellow in this subcutaneous tissue here, this is all fat cells or adipose cells. Again, we've got more blood supply in there. So there's a lot going on in these very small few layers of skin that we have. So let's start with the outermost layer and work our way in, this epidermis. As we mentioned in chapter 4, these cells are keratinized. So they have this keratin protein that helps to toughen up those cells so they can withstand different tensile forces. And they're stratified because there's more than one layer. Squamous, they're flat cells. and it's that epithelium. We're going to look at these 4 different types of cells that are found within this epidermis here. So those keratinocytes. This keratinocyte is the main cell of the epidermis. All of those squamous cells in your skin are called keratinocytes because they make that protein keratin. As I had mentioned before, it makes those cells really tough. It helps to protect your skin. Keratinocytes will also make lamellar granules. These are kind of little lipid, fat type granules that make a water repellent seal. Think about when you take a shower, you take a bath, you go swimming. Water doesn't seep into your skin or water doesn't leave your skin. That's because of these lamellar granules that is preventing water from leaving or soaking into your skin. Another type of cell, those melanocytes. Melanocytes are the cells that make your skin's color. These cells come from one of these 3 primary germ layers that we all develop from. So we go through embryology. We're going to talk about embryology in every system. We're starting here. It comes from the ectoderm, is the name of this embryological layer. And they're going to make this pigment called melanin. Melanin is the actual color coming out of these cells that gives your skin its specific color. This melanin can be a yellow-red or a brown-black type of a pigment. What this melanin does is it's going to absorb ultraviolet light from the sun. So as it absorbs this ultraviolet light, it's preventing damage to the DNA in that bottom layer of cells that replicates. We want to protect those layer of cells, so we use this melanin to protect those cells. But those melanocytes are also susceptible to damage from the sun. Another cell, dendritic cells. They're also known as Langerhans cells. They're starting to use dendritic cells more, but Langerhans cells, you may still hear it, so kind of being familiar with the term at least. These dendritic cells are your immune cells. So they're going to come from that red bone marrow. All of your immune cells come from that red bone marrow. And they help to protect against any kind of microbes that may get into your skin if you have some kind of cut, abrasion, sore, something. Different microbes can get into your skin that way. These dendritic cells work to prevent you from getting sick or getting an infection from these microbes. But they are very easily damaged by the sun. Tactile cells or Merkel cells are another type of cell we have in this epidermis. These are touch receptors. So these are what are going to allow you to feel when somebody taps you on the shoulder. When you go to pick something up, you're touching something. Those tactile cells are the ones that let you feel that. We've got these non-encapsulated sensory corpuscles, which are Merkel discs, that are found in the deepest layer of the epidermis. So we've got drawings of some of these different cells here. You can see the all the little black lines are those keratin proteins. All the little dots are those lamellar granules that is keeping your cells tough. They can withstand different tensile forces, and they prevent water from leaving or seeping into your skin. Those melanocytes that are making that melanin, that skin color. All of these little vesicles, these little circles inside of these cells, those are containing melanin. That's allowing your skin to look as dark or white or light as it can. If we look at different colors, we'll see that some people's skin can actually be like see-through because there is no color to it. Our next one is this dendritic cell. This is our immune cell. It is working to prevent you from getting some sort of infection through your skin. And then we have our tactile cell. This one is non-encapsulated, so it's just one of these mechanoreceptors is what they're called, but they're just receptors that are allowing you to feel something. Somebody touches you, you pick up something that you're holding, you're feeling it. That is all because of these tactile cells. So within the epidermis, we have thin skin and thick skin. Most of your body is thin skin. Most of your body. Thick skin is found in the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet only. And the main difference between the two layers, the thick skin has the stratum lucidum that the thin skin does not. So the back of your hand, your arm, your shoulder, your trunk, your legs, they're going to have the stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum corneum, going from deep to superficial. Thick skin is labeled the same way, from deep to superficial, but after that stratum granulosum, we have that stratum lucidum, then that stratum corneum. That stratum corneum is the outermost layer that we see when you're looking at somebody's skin. So we look, this stratum basal, basal bottom, always going to be this bottom layer here. So this very bottom layer is always going to be that stratum basal. That's the layer, as you can see in this cell right here, different color, that is going through mitosis. That is the cell, this is the layer that divides. One cell stays at the bottom, the other cell pushes up towards the top. The stratum spinosum, it's labeled the spinosum because at this point, these cells are getting pulled different directions. So they kind of have some points to them. That is where that name comes from. The stratum granulosum is when we start to get those lamellar granules. That's why it's named granulosum, because you can start to see all kinds of little spots in the cells. Stratum lucidum is always going to be a clear layer before that stratum corneum at the very top. So if we look at an actual drawing or an actual slide, the very bottom layer kind of goes up, travels down. That's that stratum basal. And then we have quite a few layers of that stratum spinosum underneath it. Some of these cells, you can see this cell has a nice little point to it over here. There's lots of little points to these cells just because of the directions they're getting pulled. As one cell moves up, but then the cell that it's attached to hasn't quite moved up yet, and they're being held together by those desmosomes from chapter 4. So those desmosomes holding those cells in place, they're pushing it up one cell while the other one hasn't been moved up yet. So it's pulling these cells in different directions. That stratum granulosum in this picture, it's a pretty dark layer. It's almost a black kind of layer. That's all of those little granules you see in those cells. The next layer up is that it's picked up all the stain. It's that stratum lucidum. So we're looking at thick skin right now. This is that thick. That very top layer, that stratum corneum. So let's go into a little more detail about each of these different layers. I've mentioned a bit about them. I'll point out something different. That stratum basal, as I mentioned above, it is that deepest layer. It is made of keratinocytes. These keratinocytes make that keratin protein that protects these cells. So it's protecting the deeper layers from injury. As I mentioned, they are held together by desmosomes. This is what connects one cell to the next, and that stratum basal is held down to the bottom by hemidesmosomes. So that basement membrane. We have melanocytes in this layer. We have tactile epithelial cells in this layer. Another name for the stratum basal is the stratum germinativum because they're making new cells. That is that stratum basal's role. Let's make new cells. The next layer up. Once one of those cells at the stratum basal goes through mitosis, replicates, that cell that gets pushed up moves on to the stratum spinosum. It's usually 8 to 10 layers thick of those keratinocytes. They're producing more keratin. We have dendritic cells here. And we have some of those projections of melanocytes. So that skin color, it's still all present in the stratum spinosum. Now we get to the stratum granulosum. In the stratum granulosum, it's usually only 3 to 4 layers of cells. At this point, cells are going through apoptosis. That programs cell death. At this point, let me pull up this picture. If you look at this stratum granulosum here in the drawing, look at how far some of these cells are from that bottom layer. At this point, they're getting too far away from nutrients. Nutrients can only diffuse up so far before cells are no longer getting those nutrients. That's what's happening to the stratum granulosum. So everything starts to degenerate as they get further away from their nutrients that they need to survive. We've got all of those lamellar granules. As I mentioned before, they're made of lipids. Because lipids are hydrophobic. They do not like water. So since they're hydrophobic, this is what prevents water from leaving. So they're acting as that water repellent seal. Our cells are not long, since there's no nutrients, they can't do their normal metabolic activities anymore. That is why they are going through that apoptosis in this layer, and they are starting to die. In thick skin only is that stratum lucidum. It's only 4 to 6 layers of dead keratinocytes. At this point, these cells are pretty flat. All we have left in there is that keratin protein in that plasma membrane. It's just an extra layer of toughness. Think about everything your feet go through, every step you take, you're putting a lot of shearing forces, even when you're in shoes. You're putting shearing forces on those shoes or on those feet. So it provides that layer of toughness for the bottom of your feet and then your hands, because your hands are always being used to do something. So it's got that extra layer of thickness to help prevent any kind of damage. Now the top layer, the stratum corneum. This can be anywhere from 25 to 30 layers of those flat, dead keratinocytes. They contain that keratin protein, but there's no longer a nucleus, there's no longer organelles because they've kind of died off and degenerated because they're not being used. Cells are going to start to overlap each other in this layer. This is where these cells almost start to fit together, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. And this is the layer of cells, that outermost layer that is constantly being shed off. Anytime your skin brushes up against anything, be it even the clothes that you're wearing right now, these cells are shedding off. They're continuously being shutting off all around you. They replace cells. These cells that are being shut off get replaced continuously. Their main job is to protect the layers underneath. If there's extra friction, the skin somewhere, usually it's the foot. People who do certain things with their hands, baseball, rock climbing, football even. Have you even seen track people who like relay track people? They get some really good calluses on their hands, which is that abnormal thickening of that stratum corneum. Again, it's trying to protect because it's increased cell protection there. That's what causes this callus to form. So I like to include charts from your textbook that kind of gives a summary of all of the information that's in the slides before it. So it's a good place to go to review because it gives like the main information of what is happening at these specific layers. So I kind of mentioned it before, that stratum basal, that very bottom layer, those cells are going through mitosis. When one of those cells goes through mitosis, splits, one cell moves up while the other cell still stays there. So this is what's pushing these cells towards the surface of your skin, is every time these cells go through mitosis. Then they start to accumulate that keratin protein, and this is the process of keratinization. These proteins are being created as more cells are being created, and these cells are slowly moving their way up the layers. Eventually, they're going to go through that apoptosis because they are just too far away from the dermis underneath. By the time the cells get up to the very top layer, they're going to be sloughed off. From the stratum basal to the very top, it takes 7 to 10 weeks just because they're moving through so many different layers. And as I mentioned in chapter 4, epithelial cells get all of their nutrients through diffusion. So in the skin, that dermis, that is connective tissue, is sending nutrients up via diffusion into the epidermis. So that stratum basal, they can increase cell production if layers above that stratum basal get stripped away, get damaged. We have hormones that are going to control the cell growth in your skin, that epidermal growth factor. Somebody who has too many cells getting to that top layer too fast and sheds those off, that's actually what is causing dandruff. Too many cells that are being shed off. So let's look at the dermis. The dermis sits underneath the epidermis. It is dense, irregular, connective tissue. All those collagen fibers traveling in lots of different directions. Because of the collagen, and it also has elastic. It's very strong, but it has that ability to stretch and recoil. Again, it's going to be the thickest at the palms and the bottoms of your feet. But it is still thicker than the epidermis, those epithelial cells. It's thicker than that layer. We have a lot of different cells. Those fibroblasts, that's what makes the cells, the matrix, the extracellular matrix that makes up this connective tissue. Those macrophages, we've got our immune system in there. We have fat cells in there. We have blood vessels in there. We have nerves, glands, hair follicles. There's a lot happening. The dermis is made up of two layers as well. We have the papillary dermis and the reticular dermis. These two layers of the dermis are helping to provide this strength and elasticity to our skin. So in the papillary dermis, it's the top fifth. It has collagen, it has elastic fibers in there, but it has a very large surface area because it has what is known as these dermal papillae, or as we kind of saw on that slide before, that go up and down. That is why it's papillary, because it has the dermal papilla, these up and down kind of design to it. There's going to be blood vessels that travel up and down through here. These are really small capillary loops. Capillaries are the smallest blood vessels we have. We're going to have tactile corpuscles or Meissner's corpuscles. We're going to have free nerve endings. So there's a lot happening. We've got nerves that are coming up and through here that allow us to feel things. Should also put, we've got some veins that come through here. There's a lot going on in here. We kind of mentioned it in here, but these free nerve endings allow you to pick up warm temperatures, cold, pain, tickling, and itching sensations. That's just mentioning them now. We'll go into a lot greater detail when we get to the nervous system at the end of the semester. The reticular dermis. This is the layer underneath that papillary dermis. And this is what connects the dermis to the subcutaneous tissue underneath. So there's lots of collagen fibers. There's fibroblasts, because again, we need cells that are going to make new collagen, make new elastic, make that extracellular matrix. We've got more adipose cells and we've got more elastic tissues. Here, we've got that dense, irregular connective tissue. So those collagen fibers are going to be traveling in every which direction. We've got elastic fibers in there. And it's arranged to let skin resist stretching. As we mentioned, there's blood vessels, nerves, hair follicles, sebaceous glands, those oil glands, sudoriferous glands. Speaking of striae, striae is a name for stretch marks. This is if there is damage to the dermis. Like the skin gets stretched too much. Pregnant women, where they're gaining weight pretty quickly, especially in the last trimester, that baby grows or that fetus grows extremely fast, especially in that last trimester. So that skin is stretching really quick. So if that skin gets overstretched and it causes some of those collagen fibers to kind of tear, get like disrupted in their pattern, blood vessels can break it while it's happening, and it can cause this striae or stretch marks. As we mentioned in chapter 4, especially with connective tissue, it doesn't heal as well. When collagen fibers, when these fibroblasts come in and try to fix damage to these collagen fibers, scar tissue forms instead. When that scar tissue forms, that's what gives stretch marks. This stretch mark kind of appearance is because there was damage pulling apart of all of those collagen fibers, or even tearing of those collagen fibers if skin was stretched fast enough. So we mentioned those dermal papilla. We have epidermal ridges. These are elevations and lines or patterns. Those, if you look at your fingers, your fingerprints. Epidermal ridges make up your help to make up your fingerprints. There's more to it. We've got these all over our hands, fingers, bottoms of our feet, toes. Here's an interesting thing. They start to develop during the 3rd month of fetal development. That's pretty early on. And they kind of follow that dermal papilla. So the dermis is going up and down. That epidermis underneath is following that up and down. We've got these epidermal pegs. The ridges are the up part. Whoops. Ridges are the up part. The pegs are the part that go down. On the tip up here, we have sweat glands. Your hands have a lot of sweat glands, a lot more sweat glands than other areas in your body. So at the top of these epidermal ridges, we have these sweat pores, these little openings of these sweat glands. And this is what helps to form your fingerprints. Interestingly enough, they're genetically determined. Even identical twins will have a different pattern. Everybody's is different. That's why we can use them to identify somebody. So if we look at this picture here, this is a good picture. You can see those epidermal ridges, the parts that kind of stick up, the pegs that go in between, all of these little things that I'm circling here, those are openings to sweat glands. And this is what is helping to form those fingerprints that we have. A lot going on in there, and that's just at the tip of your finger. Let's go back to the dermis, because the fingerprints are made up of that dermis and epidermis, the sweat glands that actually come out of that dermis. So these two layers are kind of working together. Let's look at pictures, because I like pictures. This is giving you that epidermal peg and ridges that go up, peg down, ridge up, and then the dermal. This is the papillary dermis that is traveling up and down. So this layer through here is that papillary dermis. That's what we've been mentioning. It helps to increase that surface area. That epidermis, it gives nutrients, so nutrients can diffuse up higher into that epidermis before those cells start to die off. That's why that stratum spinosum can still live, is because those dermal pegs that go up, or papilla that go up there, that's what is allowing those nutrients to get up further. And as I showed, these different surfaces fit together to help to allow your skin to put up with a lot of different shearing forces throughout. So let's look at skin color here. There's a few things that can cause your skin color. We mentioned melanin. Melanin is either that brown, yellow, red skin color. But hemoglobin is a protein found in your red blood cells. And if your skin is transparent enough, you can actually see it. The other one is keratin. Keratin comes from carrots. It's the vitamin A. People who eat a lot of carrots, this vitamin A can get deposited into those adipose cells in your skin, and they can start to give that skin more of an orange hue. So melanin can come in this pheomelanin, which is that yellow to red, or eumelanin, which is that brown to black. We have more melanin or melanocytes producing color on the penis, the nipples, that areola, which is the area around the nipples, your face, and your arms and legs. If you've ever gone out in the sun and tanned or gotten more color, you notice your arms pick up more color than your trunk does because there's more melanocytes there. Here's the interesting part, just a little interesting factoid. Everyone has the same amount of melanocytes, those cells that are giving us that color. It's just the amount of that color that is being produced that makes everybody's skin color different. We all have the same amount of cells. But one person's cells who are working really hard and producing a very dark pigment, somebody else's cells could be working very little and provide almost a transparent appearance to their skin. Freckles. Freckles are also genetically determined, and it's just an accumulation of melanin in that specific area. So people who get freckles when they go out in the sun, those freckles that are being produced, Number one, they're genetically determined, and it's that accumulation of melanin from that specific area. Age spots. What happens when you go out in the sun a lot and then you get older? This is common in people over the age of 40. And again, it's an accumulation of melanin. But unlike freckles can fade. Age spots do not fade. That is a big difference between freckles and age spots. Age spots do not go away. A mole or a nevus. Nevus is the medical term for a mole. They can be flat, they can be raised, but they are a benign growth, which means they're non-cancerous, and it's an overgrowth of melanocytes. At the end of this section, this chapter, we'll go through how to identify cancerous versus non-cancerous moles. Since everybody in this class is doing something within the medical field, you're going to need to be able to learn to identify, to tell people when they should really have something go checked out. So how do we make this melanin? Melanin that these melanocytes may come from a protein called tyrosine. Tyrosine is one of those proteins that we take in. They use the enzyme tyrosinase in the melanosome that is found inside of melanocytes. So when we get exposed to sunlight, that sunlight is going to increase that tyrosinase, that interaction with tyrosine, and it's going to increase that melanin production. By producing more melanin, we are trying to protect from UV damage. Because that UV light, that sunlight can damage DNA. So melanin, its role is to absorb that sunlight to prevent damage to the DNA of our cells. Those people who get tan in the summer, you're thinking about all those layers of cells that accumulate melanin in the summer. As those cells make their way up to the top layer and get shed off, that's what causes you to start losing your tan. That's how your skin kind of goes more white in the winter. You're shedding off that tan as you're shedding off layers of skin. So people who have dark skin, they've got a very large amount of melanin in their skin. It can be red, yellow, brown, black. Someone who is light-skinned, they have very little melanin. Some people, their skin can appear translucent to the point where you can actually see the blood traveling through the capillaries in the dermis underneath that epidermis. They can see red, you can see pink, because it's just going to depend on how much oxygen's in that blood at that point. But their legs, some people, me, my legs get so white, you can see all the blood vessels in my legs. I have patients that are that way as well. Their legs get, or like the skin is so translucent, you can see the blood vessels and everything underneath. As I mentioned, that carotene, I said carrots, it's also from egg yolks. It's used to make vitamin A. We need vitamin A to C. But when we have excess vitamin A, it gets stored in those fat cells. And that's what makes skin appear orange if you eat large amounts of foods that contain carotene. Our skin can appear different colors, other colors. Cyanotic. Break it down. Cyan is blue. So someone who is cyanotic, their skin is blue. Why? Not enough oxygen. Jaundice. Jaundice is a yellow pigment, and it's from bilirubin. Someone who has liver disease can have this jaundiced appearance because your liver uses bilirubin to make bile that helps to break down fats. It's also, and it's from broken down red blood cells. So you get into it in a lot more detail in anatomy too. But this is what causes, if it starts to build up in your skin, it can cause this jaundice appearance. In a newborns sometimes have this jaundice appearance because their liver is not fully functional yet when they are born. So their liver doesn't know what to do with this bilirubin, so there's put it into their skin, and that's what can give a newborn a yellow appearance. They put these newborns under these bright lights, these specific lights. I'm not sure exactly which ones they are, but it's supposed to help activate the liver and get this yellow pigment out of the skin. Erythema, redness. When somebody's skin appears red, say after you just exercised, you just ran down the street chasing something, your face may appear red afterward because those capillaries in that dermis expand, they get larger. More blood comes to the area. That's causing it to turn red. It happens when you go somewhere really hot. It can happen in an injury, an infection, inflammation, and allergic reactions. Palo is pale. Somebody whose skin is very pale, they could be going through shock. A large amount of blood loss. Or they could be anemic, where they don't have enough red blood cells. Some of these colors are very easy to see when you look at somebody's face. But it's not easy to see on somebody who is dark-skinned. So somebody who is dark-skinned, there's other ways to detect these colors. You can look at their nail beds if their nails are not painted. So look at their fingernails. Also, the gums inside their mouth is another place where you can detect like cyan, blue, that yellow from jaundice, that pale from shock or anemia. You can see those in their gums inside their mouth. It's another place to look for different colors that can help to figure out what is happening to somebody. This was a really cool section in your book, so I had to mention it. How tattooing works, because we mentioned those epidermal cells, that top layer, those epithelial cells, shut off. So how does a tattoo work? Well, what a tattoo is doing is it is actually taking that pigment and it is putting it down into the dermis, because that dermis is very stable compared to that epidermis where that skin is constantly shedding off. The dermis doesn't do that. So within the dermis, we're depositing these different colors to create a tattoo. There's a lot of things that can cause tattoos to fade, like the sun, improper wound healing, people who like to pick scabs. You know who you are if you do. But there's also the lymphatic system. You'll go through it more when you get to anatomy too, but within the lymphatic system, it's coming around cleaning up foreign stuff. So tattoo ink is foreign. Your lymphatic system can take these little ink deposits and start to break them down and take them up into that lymphatic system. You can get different infections. They can be removed by lasers, which I've heard, which what the lasers are doing is they're taking that pigment, that ink, and breaking it down into extremely small particles that our immune system can get rid of. But lasers can leave scars, and it's extremely expensive, and I've heard it is extremely painful too. But I thought it was interesting how it worked because I had never knew. So I wanted to share. So let's start looking at some of these accessory structures that are found within the dermis. One of these is hair. We have hair most places on the body, almost everywhere. We do not have hair on the nipples, your palms of your hands, your soles of your feet, or the external genitalia. In adults, we have very heavily distributed hair on your scalp, your eyebrows, axilla, those armpits, and around the external genitalia. Genetics and your hormones are going to affect that hair pattern, that distribution of that hair. Hair on the top of your head is supposed to help protect your scalp from the sun. It's supposed to help you prevent losing too much heat off the top of your head. Your eyebrows and your eyelashes are supposed to help protect your eyes from foreign particles. There's hairs in your nose. Again, they're supposed to protect from foreign particles. Every single hair follicle has a touch receptor on it. This is why when the wind is blowing on a nice spring or summer day and the hairs on your arm move, you can feel it. You can feel those hairs moving. Some insect comes in contact with the hairs on your arms. You can feel it before that insect even lands on you. It's because all of these hair follicles have a nerve, a touch receptor attached to it. So what makes up our hair? Again, these are dead cells. They're in columns. They're keratinized, so there's a lot of proteins in there. There's more protein in the skin or in your hair than there is in your skin. We have the shaft, which is the part that we see. We have the hair root. This is underneath the skin. And within this hair root, we have the medulla, we have the cortex, and the cuticle. So within the hair follicle, we've got an external root sheath and an internal root sheath. We have an epidermal root sheath. We have dermal root sheath. We have a hair bulb. We have papilla of the hair, and then we have the hair matrix, which are the germinal cells. Those stratum basal cells that are making new cells that causes your hair to grow. Attached to every hair follicle, we have a sebaceous gland. Sebaceous gland is that oil gland. This is what causes your hair to get oily if you don't wash it for a few days. Also attached to every single hair follicle is an erector muscle of the hair, or also known as an erector pili muscle. That's the name you'll see on the test, erector pili muscle. This is smooth muscle, so this is something we cannot control. When you get cold, these erector pili muscles contract, and they're going to cause that hair to stand at a 90-degree angle, and that's what causes that goosebumps. Is that contraction of that muscle that pulls on that hair follicle that causes that hair to stand straight up. Whenever a muscle contracts, it generates heat. That generation of heat helps to warm you up. We also have those nerves or a hair root plexus that surrounds that hair follicle. Again, this is what allows you to know when that hair has moved. Somebody pulls your hair, you know it because there's nerves attached to that hair, all those hair follicles that have just been pulled. So let's dig into this a little more. So this whole thing here is a hair follicle. This is that sebaceous gland that is attached to that hair follicle, that oil gland. That hair root plexus, there's that nerve that's attached to that hair follicle. Then we have that hair bulb. This is where all of our new hairs are being formed. So if we come down to this area, let's look at the inside of a hair follicle. So inside of this hair root follicle down here, we have this stratum basal, that bottom layer of hair. Within that bottom layer of hair, we have these little melanocytes. They don't only produce your skin color, they produce your hair color. That papilla of the hair, that is the blood vessels that are coming in, that are giving nutrients to this basal or bottom layer that is allowing these cells to replicate and divide so your hair can grow. The hair bulb is just the whole bottom portion. We mentioned the different layers, that hair matrix, that's the layers. That is the cells within that stratum basal that is multiplying and dividing. The medulla, the cortex, the next layer out, and then the cuticle of the hair, the outside layer, that layer that we see. If we kind of look, then we get to this. We come all the way up, we can see in this nice electron micrograph, you can see how all of these different cells kind of fit together. They almost kind of look like shingles on a roof. The way they are kind of overlapping each other, one on top of the other, that's creating your hair. Depilatory is a substance that removes hair. What it is doing is it's kind of like a lotion, like Nair. If you've ever heard of that? It was really big in my generation. I don't know what they've done to it since, but I know it's still around. Used to burn a lot. But what it's doing is it's dissolving the proteins in that hair shaft so that you can just wipe it away and all the hair is supposed to go with it. The root is not affected, so that hair's eventually going to grow back. There's electrolysis, where they can use an electrical current. What they do is they destroy the hair matrix. If that hair matrix, those cells that are growing that hair, if they're just destroyed, those hairs cannot regrow. And then there's laser treatments, where they can also permanently remove the hairs so they don't grow back. So our hair goes through different stages of growth. That growth stage, during this growth stage, new cells are constantly dividing, they're constantly growing, and this can last anywhere from 2 to 6 years. That each hair follicle is in this growth stage. After the growth stage, they go into a regression stage. That hair's moving up that hair shaft. It's getting further and further away from that blood supply. So those cells are going to stop dividing. That hair stops growing. This takes 2 to 3 weeks. After that, that hair follicle is going to go into a resting stage. That hair falls out. Cells usually, that hair follicle will stay in that resting stage for about 3 months before it starts a new growth phase after that. So right now, about 85% of your hair follicles are currently in that growth stage, while the other 15% are either in that regression or resting phase. It's normal to lose about 70 to 100 hairs per day. If you're losing more hairs than that 70 to 100, it could signify some sort of health problems. Anemia, not enough red blood cells, thyroid problems, since thyroid deals with your cells' metabolism. Thyroid could have have something to do with it. If it's something of concern, you could bring it up to your doctor, and there's different blood tests that can be done. But it's normal to lose hairs every day. Alopecia, lack of hair. It could be genetic. In men, it can be genetic, but so it can be genetic with women. Women can get bald spots on the top of their head. It can just plain old happen with aging. Endocrine disorders. I just mentioned thyroid disorders before. There's endocrine disorders that can cause hair to stop growing completely. Chemotherapy, treatment for cancers, skin disease. Your skin's not growing well, something's happening to your skin, it can affect the hair follicles attached to it. So chemotherapy. As I mentioned, chemotherapy is usually used to treat some different forms of cancer. But what it does is it disrupts the life cycle of cells that are replicating. Cancerous cells can divide extremely fast, a lot faster than normal cells do. So chemotherapy can disrupt those cells that are replicating very quickly, but they can also affect the hair matrix cells, which is what causes some people that are going through chemotherapy to lose their hair because those hair follicles are being affected. So their hair is falling out. The interesting thing is, people who are going through chemotherapy, that 15% of those hair follicles that are sitting in that resting stage, so they're not creating any hair, they're not affected by chemotherapy because they're not currently dividing, they're resting. It only affects the cells that are continuously dividing. So once chemotherapy stops, those hair follicles that were not affected start growing first. And they can start to, the hair matrix cells are going to start to replace all of that hair that was once lost. So people who are going through chemotherapy, their hair will grow back. It just takes time. It's going to take quite a while. So we've got different types of hair all over our body, but your hair follicles actually start developing at the 12th week of development. And hairs are starting to grow at this point, at 12 weeks into development. By that 5th month, those follicles are producing some very fine hair that is known as lanugo. A fetus and a newborn is covered with this lanugo type of hair. Terminal hairs. Terminal hairs are their long, thick, very heavily pigmented hairs. Think of the hairs on your head, your eyelashes, your eyebrows. Those are considered terminal hair. These terminal hairs will start to replace that lanugo hair before birth. So babies, they do have eyebrows, they do have eyelashes. Some babies, the hair on the top of their head has been replaced with that terminal hair, others not yet. Again, it's genetically determined. There's also vellus hair. Vellus hair is also known as that peach fuzz. It's that fine hair that covers a lot of the body. Children, most of their body is covered with that vellus hair. But at puberty, terminal hairs are going to replace that vellus hair in the axilla, those armpits, and the genital region. Males have 95% of their body being terminal hairs by adulthood, while females only have 35% of their hair being that thick, coarse terminal hair. The rest of it is that fine, thin, kind of peach fuzz kind of hair. Hair color. As I mentioned before, those melanocytes were in there, so those melanocytes are making that melanin. That melanin is getting deposited into those keratinized cells, and whatever pigment they're producing is giving you that hair color. Darker color comes from that eumelanin. That red to blonde is that pheomelanin. As those melanocytes are not producing as much hair color, that's what causes hair to turn gray, because that melanin production has gone down. So there's very little melanin granules at that time. Somebody's hair turns white, there's no melanin. Air bubbles are starting to fill up that hair shaft. That's causing hairs to look more white. People who color their hair, hair coloring can add or remove pigment. There's temporary hair color that'll last like 2 to 3 washings, and it just kind of coats the surface of that hair shaft, that hair. Semi-permanent. It does kind of penetrate and sink down into that hair shaft, but it doesn't sink down deep enough, so it only lasts like 5 to 10 shampoos. Permanent hair dye. This one is going to penetrate very deep down into that hair to the point where it doesn't wash out. But that hair color, because your hair is constantly growing, it's going to grow out, where you're going to have to redo the roots or recolor your hair or do something for it. As I mentioned, puberty, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone play a role in puberty. In males, their testes are secreting out that testosterone, and that's what gives the males their typical male pattern of hair growth. Females, estrogens and progesterone, that produces that female pattern of hair growth. Androgens come from the adrenal glands. These are little endocrine glands that sit on top of the kidneys. Androgens are sex hormones. This is the only place women get testosterone from. That testosterone can be converted over to estrogens. But if a tumor is growing on those adrenal glands, it can cause excess body hair. Because again, females only get testosterone from those adrenal glands. If that gland is producing too much of that hormone, too much testosterone, females can start to get that male pattern of hair growth. It's called hirsutism. These androgens also have to be present for those common forms of baldness. Androgenic alopecia is what it male is, that male pattern baldness at the top of their head. That the medical term for it is that androgenic alopecia. Again, it's genetically determined. So if your dad had that male pattern baldness, you may have it too. Because genetics kind of win over everything, unfortunately. That's the one thing we have no control over as of yet. Someday, sometime in the future, it may be able to change, but as of now, if it's genetically predisposed, your parents have it, you're more likely to have it. So let's go through all these different glands in our skin now. Since we're still in that dermis is made up of so many different glands. Those sebaceous glands, those first ones, I've mentioned them before. They're oil glands. Every single hair follicle has one of those sebaceous glands. They produce sebum. Sebum is that oil. It's fats, triglycerides, cholesterol. There's some proteins. There's always some salts in it. Its main job is to coat that surface of that hair to prevent it from drying. When your hair dries out, it gets very brittle and breaks very easily. But all that vellus hair, that fine hair you have all over your body, also has those sebaceous glands attached to it. And it's supposed to help prevent too much moisture from leaving the skin. So it's supposed to help keep your skin from drying out. So it keeps your skin soft. It's supposed to help prevent some bacterial growth on your skin as well. Acne. Something that happens during puberty a lot because hormones are trying to regulate themselves out. So that's gonna have something to do with it because hormones, that testosterone, that estrogen, those androgens, those sex hormones, cause those sebaceous glands to grow larger. They produce more sebum. If one of those sebaceous glands gets inflamed, that's when acne forms. It's usually because bacteria has gotten into that sebaceous gland. Can cause cyst or sac of connective tissue to form. Cystic acne is the acne that causes permanent scars of the epidermis. There is dermatological treatments out there for cystic acne nowadays. So it can get rid of those scars that were permanently there. So it's something that's available now that wasn't available like 20, 30 years ago. Another type of gland, sudoriferous glands. I had mentioned them before. They are your sweat glands. But these glands specifically release their sweat into hair follicles. They do release some onto the skin surface. We have eccrine and apocrine. Eccrine, those coiled tubular glands, and they're the most common type of sweat gland. We have a lot of them on our palms of our hands, the soles of our feet, your forehead. So if you ever get into that fight or flight stress kind of moment, like when you're getting up to give a presentation in class and your palms of your hands get really sweaty, because we have a very large amount of these on our hands. The bottoms of your feet get really sweaty from some kind of stress. That's these eccrine sweat glands. Their main job is to regulate your body temperature. That thermoregulation is the regulation of that body temperature. So when your body gets too hot, you sweat. That thermoregulatory sweating to cool you off. It usually starts on your forehead and your scalp, and then it'll eventually move to the rest of your body with the palms and the soles of your feet at the end. Eccrine. Still looking at these eccrine glands here. We have two different types of perspiration. That's sweat. We have insensible perspiration. This is a type of sweat that is going to evaporate off of your skin before you even know that you are sweating. As this moisture hits the surface of your skin, it's already evaporated up and gone. Sensible means you know that you're sweating. So you're sweating in larger amounts. So you see that little beads of sweat rolling down your forehead. Sweat glands are one of the ways we get rid of wastes. But it's also released during emotional stress or embarrassment. That emotional sweating or cold sweats, it's usually due to that emotional response. Some people get it when they get up in front of a class to give a presentation. Some people get it when they get embarrassed. Something happened that they don't want other people to know about it, but their body's going to let you know anyways because you're sweating. The other type of sweat gland, those apocrine. These are found in the axilla, the groin, the areola, bearded region of males. Again, they're secreting by that exocytosis. So we have our cell, that nucleus, got all those little secretory vesicles, and they have their substance inside. That substance inside is released when these these secretory vesicles come in contact with the surface of that cell, and they release out their substance. Apocrine sweat glands, they secrete like a milky or a yellowish colored substance, and it's odorless. Here's the interesting thing. When the sweat of apocrine sweat glands reaches the skin surface, it's going to come in contact with the bacteria that live on our skin. That bacteria gives that apocrine sweat that body odor. This is where body odor comes from. And it doesn't start functioning till puberty, which is why kids don't smell. It's involved in that emotional sweating and during sexual activities. Apocrine sweat glands do not play a role in that thermal regulation, though. But these are the glands that are going to create that body odor. Another type of gland, ceruminous gland. Cerumen is earwax. So they are found in that external ear canal and produce that waxy substance, cerumen. This cerumen in the hair follicles kind of help prevent things from getting too far down into your ear. Like kids that like to try to stick thing in every opening they have, they'll stick things up your nose and their ear. That cerumen is supposed to help protect that eardrum so nothing can get past it Nothing can get in there. So here's some of these different glands that we have on our body. Nice summary from your textbook that goes through the different glands, goes through where they're located, when they start working, and what their roles are. Let's look at nails, because nails are part of this integumentary system. Again, your nails are those made from the same cells that make your skin and your hair, but they're very tightly packed. And they're a lot harder because they have a lot more keratin in them again. The nail plate is the part that we see. The free edge, there's a picture, much better. So this nail plate is this whole piece here, your nail body. The free edge, that's the part that comes off of the nail bed past your finger. The nail bed is what your nail's going to sit on. The lanola, if you look down at your fingernail, you kind of have this little crescent-shaped whiter portion. That's the lanola. The eponychium, that's the cuticle. That didn't work. There we go. And then we have the nail root. This nail root is where it anchors that nail down underneath your skin. The nail matrix, kind of like that hair matrix, the nail matrix is where new cells are being formed. The hyponychium, this is that portion, that little area underneath the skin here and that nail. Hangnail. What a hangnail is a piece of torn skin. It's because of dryness of that eponychium. Your nails, I mentioned that nail matrix is where that new nail is being grown. Your nails usually grow about 1 millimeter per week. But again, there's a lot of different things that are going to influence that, like your age, your health, nutrition status, season, time of the day, environmental temperature, all play a role in how your nails grow. So your nails are supposed to help protect the end of your fingers. They kind of provide that counter pressure. So when you're pushing down, like you're holding a pen or pencil, pushing down, they're kind of counter pressuring back. So that enhances your touch perception and manipulation of different objects. So that's why it lets you grab onto different things. It's used to scratch, groom. Some people use their nails to brush their hair when they don't have a brush. So you use your nails for a lot of different functions. Some people like to really just tap their nails and drive other people nuts. So this goes through thin skin, thick skin, all the information about it, where it's found, kind of glands that are there. It's a good, nice review of what is these different types of skin. So what are the main functions of our skin? We've mentioned thermoregulation because we talked about those sweat glands. So we regulate that body temperature. We sweat when we're hot. We sweat when we exercise. And what happens is that causes sweat, those blood vessels that are sitting in that dermis, they dilate, they get larger. which brings more blood flow to the area. The more blood flow to the area causes us to lose heat through our skin. When it's cold outside, those blood vessels get smaller. Less blood flow comes to the area because when it's cold, you're in somewhere very cold, that blood needs to be kept towards your core because we need to maintain our vital organ function. Your skin is a blood reservoir. We keep 8 to 10% of our total skin or total blood in our skin. Our skin protects us. That keratin, those lipid granules that prevent water loss, that oil that helps to keep your skin moist, but it also contains bacterial cytochemicals that helps to try to kill something, different bacteria that come on your skin. Your sweat has a pretty acidic pH to try to slow that microbial growth on your skin. Melanin's going to help protect us from the sun. Those dendritic cells are those immune cells. Those macrophages are those immune cells that come in and phagocytize. So they come in and completely eat up any kind of bacteria or viruses that they may find. Cutaneous sensations. You're able to feel stuff. Feel touch, pressure, vibration, and tickle. Detect hot and cold temperatures. These nerves, these touch receptors, can actually send pain sensations. They send pain sensations before damage has happened, but also after that damage has happened. It's going to excrete and absorb. So we lose about 400 milliliters of water through that insensible perspiration, the sweat that we don't know that we're losing. We get rid of excess salts, carbon dioxide, ammonia, and urea through our skin. We can absorb lipid-soluble materials through our skin. This is why a lot of different facial creams may contain some sort of lipid because that can be absorbed past those lipid granules, fat like fat, lipids like lipids. That's why those lipid granules will let lipid stuff through, but lipids and water don't like each other. So that's why water can't get through. A, D, E, and K are our 3 fat-soluble vitamins. The problem is certain drugs can get through our skin. Not always good ones. We can obtain oxygen through our skin and we can get rid of carbon dioxide through our skin. It's not as efficient as our lungs, but it is a way it can happen. So here's some of the toxic things that can get in through our skin. Acetone, nail polish remover. There's a lot of nail polish remover that's 100% acetone. Soaking your fingers in acetone to get nails off, like fake nails off, that's getting soaked up into your skin. Lead, mercury, more poisons to us. Arsenic, poison ivy, and poison oak can also be absorbed through our skin. So people who have ever had a reaction to poison ivy before, it's more of a delayed reaction. It doesn't happen right away, but this is soaking in through that epidermis into that dermis, which is causing some sort of reaction. Topical steroids, like cortisone. If you've ever put cortisone on a bug bite before, like a mosquito bite or something, that gets absorbed in and it helps to prevent that itching. That histamine reaction from those mast cells. Again, this is a type of allergic reaction. Our skin makes vitamin D. Unfortunately, we live in the northern hemisphere and we don't get enough sun year round to get enough vitamin D. So this entire northern hemisphere is vitamin D deficient in one way or another. at least for part of the year, but it requires direct sunlight. About 20 minutes of direct sunlight will give you 20,000 IUs, or no, 10,000 IUs of vitamin D. Problem is it's not always healthy to get that 20 minutes of direct sunlight because those UV rays from the sun can also cause skin cancer. But what we get is cholecalciferol that can get modified and activated into calcitriol, which is what our body uses, the form of vitamin D. So exposure to that UV light can give us some vitamin D. Vitamin D, most of our immune cells have some sort of receptor for vitamin D. This is why vitamin D is thought to help keep you healthy. Now, there's actual research that shows that, not thought to. So vitamin D is also one of those vitamins that when you're deficient, it can kind of make you feel sad. Seasonal affective disorder. Winter is when it's most prevalent. But a lot of it has to do with not enough vitamin D. So let's look at some wound healing here. We mentioned wound healing a little bit in chapter 4. So let's look at what happens with the epidermis and then into the dermis, what happens. When the epidermis gets injured, we have those stem cells, that basal layer, that stratum basal. I want a picture. So this is only the epidermis, not the dermis underneath. These stratum basal cells here will start to migrate towards the middle of that damage. So these cells will come and fill in. Then these cells will start to replicate very quickly to fill in all of these missing cells. Epidermal cells or epithelial cells can replace themselves 100%. So with the hormone, the epidermal growth factor, these cells will continue to divide until that epidermis is completely replaced. But what happens if the injury goes into the dermis? Well, if we get the dermis, well, then we're starting to hit those immune cells. So we're going to hit an inflammatory phase. We're going to have a blood clot form. So during that inflammation, those blood vessels, your immune system's going to come in and try to get rid of any kind of pathogens, any kind of microbes that made it in. Any foreign materials like dirt that made it underneath into that dermis is going to get cleaned up. We're going to clean up any dying tissue. Then we have the migratory phase. That blood clot that was formed turns into a scab. Those epithelial cells are going to start to come in and form granulation tissue. Those of you going into nursing, this will come back and bite you multiple times. But those fibroblasts that are going to come in and fill in, they start making scar tissue. Those blood vessels are going to start to regrow. We have a proliferative phase. We've got this maturation phase. So what is happening is scar tissue formation, which is known as fibrosis. I'll come back to those in a minute. So during this inflammatory phase, okay, we've damaged this blood vessel down here. So we've got these white blood cells, all of these red blood cells, they're coming up. They come up to the surface. They kind of start to form a blood clot with that fibrin protein. with everything here. We're forming this clot to prevent the loss of more blood. These epithelial cells are starting to migrate over to fill in this gap. These epithelial cells, they came in and they filled in underneath this scab. The fibroblasts down here, these fibroblasts have come in and formed scar tissue. This is not the same tissue as everything around it. Now we've got fibrosis. This is where a scar has now formed and will live. It'll stay as a scar from now on. So when we talk about scar tissue, we have two different types of scars. We have a hypertrophic scar. Hypertrophic means that it stays within the boundaries of that original wound. A keloid scar is a scar that extends above. So I've got my skin here. There was damage. A keloid scar is going to come up above. Something that excess fibrosis, scar tissue formation, has caused this scar to raise up above everything else. Again, these epithelial cells are going to grow back 100% normal. This scar tissue from underneath, this scar tissue has grown excessively, so it starts to push these epithelial cells up higher, so this scar sits up above the regular skin after that scab has been sloughed off. So I mentioned that we were going to talk about development, growth and development. We'll hit growth and development in every single system through Anatomy 1 and Anatomy 2, and then we'll summarize and bring it all together it's talked about in chapter 29 in Anatomy 2. It's the last chapter of the textbook. Kind of brings together everything. So the epidermis comes from the ectoderm, which is the outermost layer of this embryo that is developing. Your skin starts to develop during this 4th week of development. It starts as a single layer of cells. At this point, we don't have those melanocytes yet. At this point in development, everybody's skin color is clear. It is see-through. Does not matter what color your skin is when you were born. At this point, everybody's skin is the exact same color. We get our basal layer by that 7th week. These flattened cells become that periderm. By the 5th month, our sebaceous glands are starting to form. At 11 weeks, we have this intermediate layer of cells that are forming. By the 11th week, we start to get our melanocytes. So between weeks 4 and week 11, everybody's skin color is clear because there's no melanocytes forming skin color yet. Those dendritic cells are going to be there by the end of the 1st trimester. So the end of the first 3 months. Between the 4th and the 6th month, those tactile cells are coming in. The dermis comes from the mesoderm. So epidermis, ectoderm, dermis, mesoderm. Mesoderm gives us that mesenchyme, that embryologic connective tissue that differentiates into all the different types of connective tissue. Your hair follicles develop at about week 12. Sebaceous glands are just kind of outgrowths from those hair follicles. Those sudoriferous glands are downgrowths of that stratum basal. Sweat glands come at about month 5. Your nails start to develop at week 10. And they continue to develop and grow. And it takes 10 months for those nails to reach your fingertips. Think they're growing 1 millimeter a week. That's very little, technically. So here, we can see that ectoderm. And then that mesenchyme. Now we're starting to develop more layers. Melanoblasts are starting to come in that are going to make those melanocytes. We get that basal layer. Now we've got a hair bud starting to come in. This hair bud continues with that sudoriferous gland and sebaceous gland. Sudoriferous there, the sebaceous over here, with this hair bulb continuing. Now we're at 16 weeks. Oh, we got a hair shaft growing. That sebaceous gland is still working on it. By 18 weeks, we're starting to get a hair shaft. We can have those little vellus hairs coming up. They have this erector pili muscle developing. We have this sudoriferous gland still growing. And then at birth, we have all layers of our skin by birth. So what happens when we get older? A lot. We will hit this in every system. Age-related changes to the skin starts at about 40 years old. And it's proteins in the dermis that start it. Those collagen fibers decrease in number, they get stiffer, they start to break apart. They kind of get into matted tangles. Those elastic fibers start to lose their elasticity. They can even start to fray. Between that collagen and the elastic fibers, that's what gives us wrinkles. Even though these changes are starting at about 40 years old, most people don't really notice it until their late 40s. Just because it takes time for all of this to start to break down. We don't have as many dendritic cells, not as many immune cells. Those sebaceous glands decrease in size. Older people tend to have very dry skin. You don't produce as much sweat. Those sweat glands don't work as efficiently. So older people are more susceptible to heat stroke. Those melanocytes don't work as well, and that's what causes that gray hair. But also those age spots we mentioned, that different pigmentation. Hair loss increases. Some hair follicles completely stop working. About 25% of males will start showing hair loss by the age of 30. And 2/3 will have a significant hair loss by 60. As I mentioned, both males and females have that pattern baldness. I mentioned those age spots. Those blood vessels aren't as permeable, so sweat. Your skin gets thinner. That stratum basal slows down. Your skin doesn't heal as well. Rosacea, which is where people can have redness, little tiny pimples, noticeable blood vessels. This happens between 30 and 60 in some people. Your nail growth even starts to slow down in your 20s and 30s. Your nails will start to become more brittle because of dehydration. Not those oil glands producing, not as much. Causes dry skin, dry nails, dry hair. There are cosmetic and anti-aging treatments. that a lot of people partake in. And it's not just women. There's topical products. As I mentioned before, facial products can soak into your skin and create moisture. There are products that contain bleach. It's very common in other parts of the world where they're in sunlight a lot more than they are here. There's even sunscreens out. When I went to Thailand, visited some friends in Thailand, and every sunscreen product contains some sort of bleach because they like to lighten their skin over there. There's microdermabrasion, where they use crystals and to remove that skin surface cells. It helps to improve that texture. Chemical peels. They use an acid to remove the cells at the surface. You can use lasers to resurface your skin. Clear up blood vessels. Blotches, blemishes, decrease wrinkles. Dermal fillers. You can put collagen in your skin. Hyaluronic acid. Lots of different products to help get rid of wrinkles. You can take fat from somewhere else in your body and put it in your face to get rid of some of those wrinkles. Botox. I think we talk about this when we get to the skeletal system in more detail, but what Botox does is it paralyzes skeletal muscles. By paralyzing these skeletal muscles, you can get rid of fine lines and wrinkles. I know people in their 20s that do it for fine lines. There's radio frequency non-surgical facelifts. There's also facelift, brow lifts, and neck lifts, which is more of an invasive surgery. There's a lot of things they can do. Skin cancer. Now let's get into some important stuff here. Skin cancer is because of excessive exposure to UV radiation from sun or tanning beds. The sun and or tanning beds cause almost every case of skin cancer diagnosed every year. Basal cell carcinoma is the most common. Basal cell, it affects that stratum basal. This one rarely metastasizes. What metastasize means is that it, like a piece of those cancerous cells break off, travels somewhere else in the body, and starts replicating somewhere else. Squamous cell carcinoma. This is 20% of all skin cancers, and it's from that stratum spinosum. This can metastasize. This can travel other places in the body, and squamous cells can start to replicate somewhere else in your body, outside of your skin. There's malignant melanomas. This is the most dangerous skin cancer because it very rapidly metastasizes and can kill you within a few months. It is due to UV light from those melanocytes. Melanoma, melanocytes. There's a 1 in 75 risk. So 1 out of 75 people will get malignant melanomas. So there's an ABCDE protocol that we use to help detect skin cancers early. First thing we're going to look at is the symmetry. When you're looking at a mole, you can look, if you have moles on your arm, leg, take a look at one of them while I go through this, because it'll kind of help you just look at it and kind of see and compare. So most moles are very symmetrical. That's my attempt at a symmetrical circle. Not very well, but I tried. A malignant melanoma is not going to be symmetrical at all. Symmetrical means if you fold it in half, it's going to completely overlap with each other. A little math, little geometry, I should say. That's what, when something is symmetrical, that's what it means. If you fold it in half, it'll completely overlap with nothing else sticking out. So if it's asymmetrical, it needs an irregular border. Again, this one does not have that irregular border. This one does. If it is more than one color, add some other colors in here, some grays. If the diameter is larger than a pencil eraser, it's about 6 millimeters, but an eraser on a pencil, if it's larger than that, then it's cause for concern. And if it's evolving, it's changing colors, changing shape. So this one that I drew over here, if it kind of changes, it's larger, that's evolving. So this went to that. So if this happens, this is a sign that it could be a malignant melanoma and it needs to be checked out. It's better to have it checked out and be nothing than not have it be checked out and it ends up killing somebody. And as all of us going, is most people that work in or that are in this class or will be working in the healthcare field, if they don't in some form already, by working in the healthcare field, you're going to see places on people's body that they can't. You can see the back of somebody's neck. You can see somebody's back. They can't see that very well. So you're working with a patient, you see the back of their neck, you see something, or even like behind their ear, because who can see behind your own ears? You see something on somebody that looks kind of funny, doesn't look right. You can't go diagnose it. What you can say is, I think you should have that. You've got something here that I think you should have it checked out. Talk to your MD, talk to your dermatologist, whoever you go see. That's the kind of stuff that you can say. Unless you're actually going to school to be a dermatologist, then you'll be looking at this stuff all day long. But for those who are working as nurses, working as in radiology, even working dental assistants, because you're still going to see areas, the back of somebody's neck, where they can't see. So it's just something to keep in mind because working in the medical field, we're responsible. So things that are going to affect skin cancer. Skin type. The lighter your skin, there's people, if it's not you, you know somebody that never tans, but they always burn. The first time they go out in the sun, they're going to burn. These people are very high risk. People who live somewhere where there is a lot of sun exposure. High altitudes, they're closer to the sun. People who work outside. And those who have had 3 or more severe sunburns in your lifetime. Not a year, in your lifetime. If you're in your early 20s, early mid 20s, you guys grew up with sunscreen around all the time. Those of us who are older, sunscreen wasn't a big thing when some of us were kids. So more of us have probably suffered those 3 or more sunburns if you're talking to people in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and on. If you have a family history of skin cancer, here's my perfect example. My mother, my father, my aunt on my dad's side, both my uncles on my mother's side have all had skin cancer. I'm waiting for it because family history is going to play into it. I have a lot higher chance of getting it, so I watch out for it. I do skin checks, especially after being out in the sun, because I have that family history. The older you are, the higher your chances. And then your immune status. People who are immune suppressed, people whose immune systems don't work that well, that can increase your risk of skin cancer. So here's some examples. We have a normal mole in the first picture. It is pretty symmetrical. It's not completely symmetrical. It is blown up. So normally this would be smaller than a pencil eraser. It does not have that irregular, maybe a little bit of irregular borders if you want to get very specific with it. But let's look at B, this basal cell carcinoma. To give us an example here. This basal cell carcinoma down here, just color it all over it, is, you can see multiple colors. There's some pink, there's some gray, there's some black. It's not symmetrical. It's not a nice circle. It's larger than a pencil eraser. Same with the squamous cell carcinoma over here. This squamous cell carcinoma, it's larger than a pencil eraser. It's irregular borders. It looks almost more like an open wound, kind of healing there, trying to heal, but it's not really. And then we have our malignant melanoma over here. This malignant melanoma, those A, B, C, D, E, this fits every single one of them. It's not symmetrical. It has irregular borders. It's more than one color. That diameter is going to be larger than that pencil eraser. And just from this picture, you cannot really tell that it's evolving. But when you watch stuff over time, you can see it evolve. That's the only one that's hard to see right up front, the A, B, C, D. You can look at just by looking at something like this. The evolving just means you'd have to watch it over time. Let's talk about the next fun one. Those of you who want to work in the hospital, those of you who want to go into nursing, maybe work in an ER, or because people who come in with some of these burns are going to end up in the hospital for a while. Burns. Burns are not just because of fires, that excessive heat. Electricity can cause a burn. Radioactivity can cause a burn. Chemicals. There's chemical burns. And what it's doing is it's denaturing or kind of breaking apart those proteins in our skin. They destroy your body's ability to maintain that nice happy balance, that happy place. Because microbes can get in. Can cause dehydration. You can't regulate your body temperature. So there's three main types of burns. There's a first-degree burn. First degree is only that epidermis. Those of you who've had a mild sunburn, you've had a first-degree burn. It can heal in 3 to 6 days. It may be painful. You'll see the redness, but there's no blisters to it. As soon as you hit a blistering, you're at a second-degree burn. We've got that epidermis. We've got even part of that dermis involved. Because we've gone into the dermis, now some of those functions of the skin are lost. You get that redness, you get blisters. Blister is a fluid accumulation between the epidermis and the dermis. Edema, swelling, pain. As I mentioned, the dermis and that epidermis separate and fluid comes in. The hair follicles and the sebaceous glands are not involved in a second-degree burn, though. It can heal in 3 to 4 weeks, but because the dermis was involved, there could be scarring. Third-degree burn, that's at full thickness. So full thickness, epidermis, dermis, and subdermis or subcutaneous tissue was involved. So we lose our skin function. Here's the thing, it doesn't hurt. You know why? Those sensory receptors have burned off. These people may need skin grafting, where they take skin, the stratum basal especially, from one area of the body or from something else, and place it over this burn so this new skin can form there. So here, I like this picture because it shows just the epidermis is involved. Second-degree burn, we've got that epidermis and that dermis. There's some blisters on this person's hand here. And then a third-degree burn. Somebody touched something somewhere that gave them a third-degree burn. Epidermis, dermis, subcutaneous. You can see that charring, that black in there. That's because we've burned through everything. It doesn't hurt. Not in the middle of, in the black area anyways, it doesn't hurt. It will hurt the tissues around it because those sensory receptors are still there. But where it's black and kind of charred, it's not going to hurt. So when a burn happens, there's systemic effects to a burn. Doesn't matter where it's at, but it's going to affect this your entire system in one way or another, which can cause them to be life-threatening because you can lose a lot of water, blood, those proteins that are in your blood. You lose enough blood and blood plasma and proteins, it can cause shock. It increases your chance of bacterial infection because you've killed off all of the immune cells that are in that area. You get reduced circulation because you've burned off those blood vessels. You're dehydrated, so there's less urine output. That immune response. So a major burn is third-degree burns over 10% of the body. Second-degree burns over 25% of the body, or a third-degree burn on your face, hands, feet, or perineum, which is kind of that underside, that anal urogenital region. If somebody has more than 70% of their body burned, they're not going to make it. So when we're looking at burns, we use a rule of nines. This rule of nines helps us to determine what percentage of the body has been burned. So let's look at a picture. I like pictures. So the anterior head and neck. So just the front, your face of your head and neck is 4.5% of your body. But if you count the head, all the front and the back of the head, that's 9%. The front and the anterior shoulder, arm, forearm, and hands, that's 9% of your body. The anterior and posterior is 18% of one arm. The front of your trunk is 18%. The back of your trunk is 18%. So the front and the back are 36%. That perineal area is at 1%. The front of your legs of one leg is 18%. The front and the back of your leg is 36%. In a child, it's a little bit different. Children's heads are larger, so that's where children's heads are 18% of their body and 14% of their legs. So It's a little bit different in a child. So let's look at some other skin problems. Pressure ulcers. Again, those of you who work in nursing or want to work in nursing, this is something that you have to try to prevent. Why? Hospital acquired ulcers, bed sores, insurance companies aren't going to pay you for. Pay the hospital for anything hospital acquired. So, besides the fact that it takes longer to heal them, but that's besides the point. So, these ulcers, what is happening is these bony prominences. So, you're laying down on something like the back, your sacrum area, like the middle of your, like right above your butt, there's this bony area. It's laying on something, it's laying on a bed, and it's not moving for a very long period of time. So bony prominences, bony projections. We'll go over more of these when we get to the skeletal system. But it can also be a cast or a splint, something laying in a cast and not moving. So if pressure is relieved after a few hours, then there's no tissue damage, which is why people that are bedridden need to be moved every 2 hours. But what happens is eventually the skin becomes non-blanchable. What that means is if you put your finger down onto that skin and lift your finger, you should have a white spot or a spot that kind of changes color and then it goes back to its normal color. That means it's blanchable. Non-blanchable means this no longer happens. That's when damage is already starting to occur. Eventually it can sink down. These tissues can start to wear away. That's when ulcers come in. Something like this on the bottom of somebody's heel. Your heels are another area where pressure ulcers can happen. These tissues, this one's starting to heal actually. They've gone in and cleaned it out, debrided it, and now they're trying to work on letting that heal. But this person had their heel laying on a bed for a very long period of time without moving it. These tissues got damaged and started to wear away. And that is what causes these pressure ulcers, which is why people who are bedridden, it's most common. There's very few patients that are bedridden in hospitals anymore unless they're in a coma. Then those people need to be moved every 2 hours to prevent these pressure ulcers from forming. So those of you going into nursing will learn a lot more about this, but that is everything for chapter 5. Thank you very much for listening.